Morena koutou, welcome along to this meeting, which is a hearing for the gambling policies for the Invercargill City Council. We have an apology from Councillor Leslie Soper. Somebody like to move that's accepted?
I'll do.
Thanks, Trish. Seconded.
Yes.
Thanks, Ria. Put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against, carried. We'll start off with an overview of the proposed policy, then go through the people who've come to present or Zoom in. It is my intention that we will deliberate and open. I can see no reason for us to go into public excluded, bearing in mind the public interest, and there are actually no matters of privacy that need to be considered. But first, if we could get an overview of the why we're here today. Rhiannon and Darren, welcome along.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair and Councillors. We have consulted on the proposed board TAB venues policy and the proposed class 4 gambling venues policy from September 18 to October 18, 2023. This is an opportunity for the hearings panel to consider submissions and hear from submitters. 11 submissions were received and 6 supported capped policies for implementation and 5 supported sinking lid policies for implementation. It is also important to note of the pre-engagement with stakeholders that happened prior to consultation, which supported sinking lid policies for implementation. The Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand, Hospitality New Zealand, the Lion Foundation, Te Whātua, and the Problem Gambling Foundation requested to speak to their submissions. The Gaming Machine Association, Hospitality New Zealand, and the Lion Foundation recommended capped policies for implementation. Specific recommendations to expand the relocation provision of the draft capped policies were recommended that were placed for consultation. The Problem Gambling Foundation and Te Whātua recommended gold standard sinking lid without the relocation, transfer, and merger provisions for implementation. Te Whātua recommended amending Appendix 2 of the draft policies to add clearer CBD and Business 2 zone boundaries. Majority of the submissions supported Council's initiative to introduce a voluntary code of conduct. The Problem Gambling Foundation recommended Council to consider supporting actions to reaffirm the intent of the voluntary code of conduct. Hospitality New Zealand recommended adding to the code of conduct to inform the creation of an offence when gambling license operators allow intoxicated patrons to remain on the gambling premises. And I would like to take this opportunity to apologize to Mr. Jared True. His name was misspelled in the report.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? Everybody's had a chance to, gosh, that's a suave photo, isn't it? Everybody's had a chance to read through policy and what's proposed and the submissions. Mm-hmm. Excellent. If there are no further questions, thank you very much. Laura. Welcome along. As you know, Laura, we generally allocate around about 10 minutes. How you want to use that time is up to you, but if you'd like to allow us to ask questions, a little bit of allowance for that at the other end would be useful. Thank you for taking the time to submit on behalf of Te Whātua Ora. Time is yours.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Laura Pope tuku ingoa. My name is Laura Pope and I'm a Health Promotion Advisor for the National Public Health Service as a part of Te Whātua Ora. Gambling is a social, economic and health issue that affects us all. Harm is met by the individual, the whānau and the broader community. Gambling is not an isolated addiction, but rather has a potential negative impacts on the totality of the individual's health and well-being. The impact of gambling is so severe it can cause negative effects on health, both morbidity and mortality, cause emotional distress, create financial difficulties, reduce the performance of an individual, cause relationship breakdown, and result in criminal activity or neglect of personal responsibilities. According to the Ministry of Health, about 1 in 5 people in New Zealand will experience harm in their lifetime due to their own or someone else's gambling. Factors that cause people to gamble include accessibility, leisure, social connectivity, stress, impulsivity, and other mental health illnesses. In New Zealand, Māori and Pacific people are disproportionately represented when considering gambling harm and addiction. Māori have been found to be over 3.13 times as likely to exhibit severe to moderate gambling addictions, followed by Pacific people that were 2.56 times as likely. In public health, it is important that we consider what is equitable for populations such as Māori and Pacific, because the health outcomes are so much more severe than Pākehā. Therefore, the best approach to take with policy is one that will help to achieve paiora, or good well-being, for populations that are disadvantaged. A contributing factor to gambling harm outcomes is accessibility to venues. Of the current gambling venues in Invercargill, 14 out of 15 of them are located in medium to high levels of deprivation. It is more likely that residents that live within those areas will engage with gambling. This, as a result, increases the burden for those that are already living in high deprivation. In Invercargill, the total money lost to gambling over the past 5 years has substantially increased. Last year, the amount spent hit a record high with 17 million lost to gambling at the pokies. Of the money lost to gambling, only 5.5 million has been donated to the community, which sits under the required 40%. Of the money that is given to the community, the majority is given to sport. In fact, last year that was 2.2 million of the 5.5 million, which is almost half of which was given. The National Public Health Service is in support of the sinking lid policy for both TAB and Class 4 gambling. An article on capping gambling in New Zealand, the effectiveness of local government policy intervention, has found that the sinking lid policy is the most effective when preventing gambling harm in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Absolute caps, or the gold standard approach that we recommend, have estimated to reduce the number of electronic gaming machines by 15% and venues by 16% per 100,000 population over a period of a year. A decrease in gambling intervention services can be found within a year of a sinking lid policy implementation, which indicates there is a reduction in harmful gambling. We propose a gold standard sinking lid, which prevents the movement of Class 4 and TAB venue licenses and prevents the movement of electronic gaming machines. This is the best public health approach to prevent and minimise harm from gambling. One of the nervousnesses around creating a sinking lid policy is that it will force people to go online. COVID-19 lockdown was able to provide us with insight into behaviour when the gambling and TAB venues closed down. During that period, there was no evidence to show that the proportionate amount of people that use gambling venues went online while they were closed. In fact, the trend saw that as soon as venues opened, there was a significant spike in gambling use, and that year was more profitable than the last. As a fundamental document for Aotearoa New Zealand, it is important that we consider te tiriti or waitangi and the obligations that we each have to uphold and honour it. We must look to contribute to equitable outcomes for Māori, and it is necessary that as a local authority you aim to address inequity and eliminate disparities. Therefore, we urge Council to consider what policy is best for Māori health and wellbeing outcomes. As a service, we are pleased to see that the Council are considering adopting the Best Practice Code of Conduct. We feel that this will help to solidify and reinforce the policies and guidelines that come from the Department of Internal Affairs and remove any room for uncertainty. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. I hope that you'll consider our feedback in your decision making. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your presentation. I have a few questions I wouldn't mind just getting a response to before I go to the other councillors. You used the term loss to gambling. So is there a term won from gambling that's used in the measurement as well?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out what you mean.
Well, I guess it's saying that there was $17 million spent at gambling.
Right.
But
So
we say
from that, how much comes
we
back?
say that that's lost to gambling because the person that has spent that money has lost that money.
There's an assumption.
Yeah. I think it's...
Statistically, I accept that the majority would be invested, lost, whatever. But I'm not sure about using that as a full measurement. With the figures that you used for the amount that's returned to the community, you said it was below the requirement. Is that across all agencies?
Yes, it was on there's a website.
So, and by all agencies, I mean
yes,
that's a cumulative figure rather than all agencies are below that.
Yeah, it's not accounting for each individual agencies, it's as a total.
And amongst those agencies, are there some who go above that minimum requirement?
I didn't look into that.
You mentioned that sinking lid policies have been shown to bring a reduction in gambling numbers. So with that in mind, taking into account that the last period of the policy has been the only time that we have been capped, has there been a change in the figures? So were our gambling harm figures reducing during all the previous years and they've just gone up recently?
So the study that I mentioned looked at different policies and how they affected different populations. So
again, it's a cumulative response rather than... Are there any figures that you have that talk about this area?
Invercargill?
Yeah.
Not necessarily, because it's very hard to measure and get a study done in a place like Invercargill. Like, you'd have to have the resourcing and things like that to provide that information.
Can you tell me where the figures for online gambling came from and how they're measured?
It was released from the Department of Internal Affairs. They just noted that there was nothing to say that as many people that were in the pokey venues or TAB, Class 4 TAB venues, went online. There was an increase. I think the Ministry of Health released some information about different statistics on online gambling use. I think they did a survey across the population, and they did find that people increased their use in My Lotto, but as I said, it wasn't proportionate.
Right. So it's a user survey or a survey of users as opposed to a specific measurement. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's useful. Thanks, Laura.
Trish? You've covered my two. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for your submission and your very detailed delivery this morning. Through your submission, I note that Te Whatu Ora has mentioned that TAB should not be permitted within a 100 metre of sensitive premises to an ATM. Do you have stats on TABs that are within that area, that they are on the use of money specifically used for gambling?
I don't know that I have stats, but it is something that we advise, because it would be an assumption to say that people are more likely to go and use the money machine if it's right there, if it's at your convenience. I think it was just about making some consistency across the two policies, because I noted that in the Class 4 venues you had listed sensitive premises, whereas in the TAB that wasn't listed. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's cool. Thank you.
Just as a follow-up to that, Laura, does Te Whatu Ora have a position on, as opposed to TAB venues, the risk from the TAB app, which doesn't involve anybody having to leave and go anywhere?
Not at this stage. We're still, I think there's certainly harm from online gambling and using things like a TAB app. But it is also noted that that's the responsibility of the DIA and not necessarily council.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's by way of comment the inequity that we have to deal with. The only policy that we can set is around venues, whereas I think the app is really. Oh, sorry, I don't actually have the app. No, I'm quite positive. Some other strange ones there, but not that. And it's kind of unfiltered. I mean, I imagine all you've got to do is just say, "Yeah, I'm 18," and that I think poses a real risk. As opposed to what it is that we're dealing with. But we have what we have, and that's what we're here for. Look, thank you very much for your comments and your submission and your response to our questions. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We are running oh no, we're almost on time. Is Jared available, Liz? Morena, Jared.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for the submission you've made on behalf of the Gaming Machine Association. We've got 10 minutes during which we can hear from you and answer questions, ask questions. Really, the time is yours.
Great, thank you. I understand you've got my PowerPoint, and I'll just ask you to flick through the slides.
Yes,
is that right?
Just going up.
Cool. So excellent questions to the last submitter. If I could just assist with a couple of those. There was a suggestion that the required 40% for Invercargill cities not coming back. So the 40% is measured on a GST exclusive basis, which equates to 5.9 million. You got 5.5 million in direct grants, so you're $400,000 short. You'll find that $400,000 in the two club venues that you've got. So the Invercargill Workingmen's Club, the profits from their machines, which remained local, of course, and benefited the very members that played the machines, was 370,000, and the extra 30,000 you're missing is the profits that come from the Club Southland. So you're in fact exactly on the nail on your 40%. The other very good question you asked is there any local data which suggests that problem gambling has either gone up or down as a result of our very different policies? So the Ministry of Health requires the treatment providers, as part of their funding, to record when someone brings or texts or goes and sees a treatment provider, they get asked which territorial authority they belong to. And you can go back and look at how many people go along. So in Invercargill City, it's pretty much stayed the same since 2017, 2018. So in 2018, we had 100 people from Invercargill City go to the treatment providers. 2019, it was 103. 2020, it was 95. 21, it was 117. And the most recent data is 101. So it's pretty much stayed exactly the same. And that's consistent with what we've seen nationally. When machine numbers have dropped, which I'll go into a little bit later on, machine numbers have dropped, the problem gambling rate has plateaued. So your presentation rates have plateaued despite the different policy settings you've had. So in relation to your policy, the first thing I'd like to address is your relocation policy. We would like your relocation policy to be expanded to enable venues that are already in the CBD or already in the Business 2 zone to be able to relocate within those zones if they can come to you on a case-by-case basis and say, we're going to an area that's more desirable from a harm minimisation perspective. In relation to the cap, we agree that setting a cap at current numbers is entirely reasonable. Just next slide, please. So in relation to relocations are currently only permitted if the venue is moving into the CBD or the Business 2 zone. This suggests that if you're already within that zone, you're not allowed to move within the zone. And of course, the reason why we have relocations is principally a harm minimisation tool. And venues should be free to come to council and should be free to relocate if the new site is more desirable from a harm minimisation perspective. Through to the next slide, please. So a venue that's already in the CBD should be able to move to another spot in the CBD if it can show to you that the new location has a lower deprivation rating. And the speaker before was correct that there is a lot of venues that are already in medium to high deprivation areas. Let's not entrench those venues where they are. Let's give them the opportunity to move to a lower deprivation rating. The policy should also allow a venue that's currently within the CBD or Business 2 zone that is close to a suburban area or close to a residential area or close to a playground or a church or a marae to be able to move to a more suitable location away from those sensitive sites, away from residential areas. Next slide, please. Having a relocation policy that enables you to move within the CBD should also enable our venues to move to new, modern, refurbished premises. If we have a new, modern premise, which typically then changes the focus from more of an alcohol focus to more of a food focus, those venues tend to attract a more affluent clientele that are less at risk from suffering from gambling-related harm. So again, if we come to you and say, look, we're looking to move within the CBD, it's going to be a smaller premise, a more upmarket premise, a premise that we consider is going to be more appropriate from a harm minimisation perspective, council should be able to consider that on a case-by-case basis, and if they agree, grant it. If we don't allow relocation, it just entrenches venues where they currently are, which may be unsuitable. Just next slide, please. In relation to the cap, we entirely agree that adopting a cap at current numbers is reasonable. We're not advocating for more or additional machines. Gaming machines are naturally declining. We've had a 31% reduction in your local machines since 2015. Next, through the next slide. Problem gambling rate in New Zealand is extremely low. It's only 0.2% of the adult population, and that's all forms of gambling, not simply playing on a gaming machine. There is no link between gaming machine numbers and problem gambling rates. Over the last 10 years, we've had 25% of our machines removed from our fleets, and during that same 10-year period, problem gambling rate has plateaued. Through the next slide. There is significant benefits from having the local machines. First and foremost, it's player entertainment. People enjoy playing our machines. Gambling's a popular pastime, a leisure activity. 69% of adult New Zealanders participate in at least one form of gambling at least once a year. Next slide, please. And as you heard before, in 2022, $5.5 million in grants were made locally. In addition to that, you've got the funds that come from your 2 club venues, which equate to the extra $400,000 to $450,000. But there's also grants that we make to national organisations and regional organisations that also provide an additional benefit. And that tends to be around about 6% of our grant pool. That funding is extremely valuable and not able to be replaced. Next slide, please. Adopting a restrictive policy is unlikely to reduce problem gambling, but will accelerate the migration through to online-based gambling. Next slide. The latest data has come out and has talked about online gambling, and it showed that a staggering 27% of New Zealand adults have participated in some form of online gambling, with 19% of that group doing so weekly. You talked about the TAB app. Over 80% of the revenue, TAB's revenue, is through that app on your phone now. My friend before talked about the fact that there was a suggestion that there was no evidence that when all our venues were closed, no one migrated to online, which was obviously, it's the ultimate test. You can have all the academic research reports you like, but we actually had a situation where all our venues were closed, and the question was, did people go online? Well, the data is there from all the annual reports. You look at My Lotto, 2018, the spend was $200 million. When the venues were closed in 2020, that jumped up to $430 million. Next slide, please. Sky City has got an online casino, an offshore-based online casino based in Malta. Pre-COVID, $254 million was spent. If you have a look at the annual reports, post-COVID, that jumped up to close to $800 million. You can't tell me that when the physical venues are closed, people aren't migrating. The spend shows it itself. You may have recalled probably about a year ago now, Kiwibank came out with a media statement and talked about how much money their customers are spending on their credit cards on online gambling. And Kiwibank's stats showed that it was $30 million every month just in their customers being spent on online gambling. And last slide, please. Offshore-based online gambling is obviously undesirable. There's no local grants, no local employment, no funding for the New Zealand government by way of taxes. It's totally unregulated, totally Wild West, no harm minimisation controls, no regulations. Massive prizes are offered, and when you win, very difficult to actually receive the prize, and there's frequent inducements to gambles. Thank you, and I'm welcome. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jared, and our apologies for misspelling your name on a couple of our documents when they went out. You mentioned the proportion of people who are using the TAB app as being at around 80%. Is it fair to assume that that high percentage is a result in the decline in the number of venues that they have, or is it a changing pattern of ease of use?
Oh, well, I use the TAB app. I'm sitting in front of the TV and the football's on, and I say to my son, which team's going to win, Ashton? And he reckons, oh, this team will win. And I lean over, pick up my phone, and 3 seconds later, the bet's on. I wouldn't jump in my car, drive 5 minutes down the road, stand in the queue, get a ticket printed out, and then when I win, repeat that process. It's a bit like saying, when you've got Netflix, would you then get up, drive to the video store, get a tape out, bring it home, put it back in the machine, and then have to repeat the process to return it the next day?
What is this tape you talk of, Jared?
Exactly.
Look, my tongue was firmly in my cheek there. I'm absolutely old enough to remember before such things existed. Trish, any questions?
No, I'm just interested, Jared, when you talk about entrenched venues, where they are, what do you mean by that?
So having gaming machines as part of a hospitality business is a valuable commodity. It's not the venue's primary source of revenue, but when you've got 40 to 45% of your revenue coming from your gaming machines, you are not simply going to pick up your business and move to a more affluent part of town and lose that opportunity and lose 40 to 45% of the revenue of your business. It just doesn't make economic sense. So you just entrench those venues where they are. Whereas if you give those operators the opportunity to move and take their full existing offering to a more affluent part of town or a more suitable part of town, or to a new modern refurbished smaller sports bar or restaurant type offering, then it becomes entirely economical, and you motivate those operators to look at those opportunities, and you help to facilitate those moves, which are positive for everyone. There's no downside.
Thank you very much.
Rhea?
I do have one question. Point 26 of your submission talks about the low gambling rate by international standards. What I'm interested to see and note, I'm not sure if this gets recorded or not, 0.2% of people aged 18 years and over in this point says that they have, well, that's a portion of the age group. Is there a particular surge from 18 to 23-year-olds that are increasing in their on premises gambling?
I haven't seen any data for that for New Zealand, but just 2 days ago I saw an article and some research in Australia, and they were showing that younger age group, the 16 to 23-year age group, there was a real acceleration of that in the online space, particularly in relation to online casinos and online sports betting.
Okay, thank
but
you.
It's not the young people that are turning up and finding our machines incredibly attractive.
Is it more the...
It's more of a middle-aged.
Right, okay.
Market.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jared, the previous submitter talked about figures being below the required level here. You added figures from the club venues which showed that it came up to the required level during your submission. But if I've got one of the local groups of venue operators saying that they exceed their required level, simple math says that someone's not meeting theirs.
So the 40% is a national requirement. So every gaming society, regardless of where their venues are, must meet 40%. There's some smaller venues that won't actually make a 40% profit because they just don't have the revenue through their machines. And areas like South Auckland, there's machines that have very high revenue and exceed the 40%. But we do know how much is spent, and we do know what the required percentages of that, which is the 40% on a GST exclusive basis is 5.9 million. Your direct grants are 5.5. One of your club venues had their financial accounts show $370,000 profit. You add the other club into that, you will be at or above the 40%, which is what you would expect.
Okay, thank you.
And you've got excellent local gaming trusts that are very, very focused on returning funds locally.
Thank you, Jared. No further questions?
No.
Jared, we appreciate the submission from the Gaming Machine Association and also your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darrell.
Hello, how are you?
Good. We'll just give you a second to come up on Zoom while we change over. There we go. Oh, goodness. Thanks for your submission, Darrell. As you know, we've got 10 minutes for you to make it, there-ish, which includes time for questions, but the slot is yours to use as you please.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll keep it succinct, and rather than reinventing the wheel and copying or going along the same lines as Jared there, we've supported his submission a couple of times in mine. So I'll just give you a bit of background about Hospitality New Zealand and then read through our submissions, and then it's over to you for questions if you have any. So Hospitality New Zealand is a member-led non-for-profit organisation. We represent approximately 3,000 businesses around the country, and that includes cafes, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, commercial accommodation, country hotels and off-licences. We've got 121 years of advocating on behalf of the hospitality and tourism sector, and we are now led by our new Chief Executive, Steve Armitage. We have a team of 7 regional managers around the country and a national office in Wellington to service our members. We have a board of management which is made up of elected members and hospitality professionals. We have 18 local branches covering the entire country, representing at a local level all those member businesses which are located in the region. This obviously is a submission from the Southland branch of Hospitality New Zealand. So thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on your Class 4 gambling venues policy. Hospitality New Zealand recommends the capped option be adopted and continued at 226 machines. Hospitality New Zealand supports the Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand's submission, in particular their evidence and recommendations for expanding the relocation provision. We agree with GMANS that the relocation provision should be expanded to include allowing council to consider relocations within the CBD or Business 2 zone already on a case-by-case basis. Unlicensed premises are the safest place to gamble and consume alcohol, with all of their host responsibility and harm minimisation practices that they follow in adhering to the several legislation. Too much restriction for on-premise Class 4 operations does push people online, which at present is unable to be regulated. Got a few comments on the Code of Conduct. Hospitality New Zealand wholeheartedly supports Class 4 harm minimisation, demonstrating our commitment through robust measures encompassing support, advocacy, training and the provision of resources. Collaboration is a key principle of our approach, and we actively seek to engage with venues, societies, clubs, the DIA, the Health Promotion Agency and problem gambling support providers to amplify our impact. While Hospitality New Zealand appreciates the proposed Code of Conduct and its intent, it is important to note that the majority of its content are already obligatory under the Gambling Act 2003 and the recently amended Gambling Harm Prevention and Minimisation Regulations in 2023. Regarding the suggestion of mandatory clocks in gaming rooms, we do affirm that each gaming machine already does display the time and provides pop-up messages, PIDs, every 30 to 45 minutes, ensuring players remain cognizant of their gameplay duration and spending. Hospitality New Zealand also notes that in the case of addressing intoxicated players, as mentioned on page 6 and page 8 of the draft policy, we emphasise adherence to the Standard Supply of Alcohol Act 2012, specifically section 252, which creates an offence for the licensee or a manager of any licensed premises who allows an intoxicated person to be or remain on the licensed premises. We believe that this in itself creates a strong enough obligation without the need for additional administration. Thank you very much for the time to speak.
Thanks, Darrell. Can I first of all seek clarification then where Hans stands on the Code of Conduct? Because you've recognised that a lot of the points in it exist in legislation now, but I'm not sure I kind of got the gist of your direction of support or not support.
Yeah, that's fair enough. We do support there being harm minimisation practices, but I suppose the stance we're coming from is a lot of that code of conduct is already kind of in existence in the legislation anyway. So I do think it could just be extra work for yourselves to administer it when it's already in place in the legislation.
Even though it's voluntary?
The thing is, the legislation isn't voluntary, and a lot of what's mentioned in that code of conduct, majority of it, are already mandatory obligations under the several legislations.
So if I can praise you, then you're suggesting that it's pointless?
Yes.
That's fine. No, like that's fine if that's your position. Can I ask, Darrell, and you don't necessarily have to answer it because it's just a curiosity question. Does the submission that's come from Hans come from your mandate, from your membership, or did you canvass local membership?
Yeah, canvass local membership, and then I wrote it on their behalf.
Great, thank you. That's really useful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
No questions. Thank you, Gerald.
No worries.
Rhea,
No, you asked the question I was going to ask.
I'm good like that.
Yes, you steal it all the time.
It's the benefit of going first. Darrell, once again, thank you for the submission that you've made on behalf of Hospitality New Zealand.
Very welcome.
We appreciate the fact that you've gone around your membership, taken the time to submit and given us some of your time this morning. Thank you very much.
No worries at all. And if you did want to discuss the code of conduct further, please feel free to reach out.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great one. See you.
Bye. Kay. There we go. We're just switching over. Well, it doesn't say Kay. Have we got Kay or Samantha? No, that's Samantha's next. Is Kay Christensen not here? Nope. In that case, we jump into Samantha. Samantha from Lion Foundation, welcome along. Thank you very much for giving up your time. We've had a chance to read through your submission. We've got 10 minutes to hear from you, which includes time for questions. Really, the time is yours. And
Perfect.
your PowerPoint's just gone up.
Thank you so much. And the PowerPoint really is just to keep me on track more than anything else, because otherwise I will continue talking well past my 10 minutes. Look, firstly, thank you all very much for the opportunity to make both the written and oral submission, and thank you to your policy advisors for the work that they have done in putting this together. Essentially, the Lion Foundation, moving on to the second slide, sorry, I see that I've said it was established in 1988. It actually wasn't. It was established by a trustee in 1985, and since then we have distributed well over $1 billion in community grants, with a rounding down to a $42 million distribution last year, which was essentially in excess of 43% of the amount that we had available to distribute. We are a national organisation. In fact, the venue in Bluff is our last one on the South Island, and we operate from that venue right up until the north of the North Island. We are an all-inclusive funder. We prioritise the areas of sport, health, education, and then arts and community and culture. We do prioritise sports funding, but it also depends on the needs of the community. We have regional grants committees who assist myself, the team, and the trust board in making sure that funding lands where it should land. We understand that, you know, the funding, navigating the funding requirements of all organisations is an absolute cesspit. It's the only word I can think of it, because we all do things so very, very differently within one set of legislation. Yeah, so our regional grants committee are local members. So our South Island committee distributes money on behalf of, well, from all of the funds from all of the TLAs. And we pride ourselves on really trying to make sure that the funding lands where it should. Moving to the next slide, please. We do not support a sinking lid. I'm not going to sit there and pretend that, well, I'm going to just say we believe it's a blunt tool which really takes away a lot of discretion of councils to really try and make a balanced policy with the interests of the Gambling Act as well as the interests of the community at heart. We do absolutely support the retention of a good relocation clause. The harm minimisation attributes of a good relocation clause, I think, are often misunderstood or not understood fully, is perhaps a better way of summarising it. We believe that the status quo policy is actually working really, really well. We certainly haven't had an inclination to grow gambling in Invercargill. We have a venue, as I say, one venue in Bluff, which is licensed to operate 9 machines, and we operate 8 in the pub. We believe that your current policy appropriately balances the 8 purposes of the Gambling Act. It balances the community access to funding, and it also, with a very well-funded harm prevention gambling service provider, we feel that it's actually a really good confluence of all of the aspects, and that is supported by the current policy. I think you would have probably read throughout the submissions both sides of a very involved and intricate and interesting coin regarding, you know, does a sinking lid actually support a reduction in problem gambling? We would suggest that there is no evidence to support that. I have in our submission gone into extensive factors relating to one of the most recent pieces of work, which was the Malatest documentation, which was commissioned by the Ministry of Health, and that in itself significantly states that the prevalence of problem gambling, not just pokies in pubs, isn't reducing. That being said, however, if we move to the next slide, I think one of the most, let me actually get there, the statistics actually represent problem gambling across all forms of gambling, and whilst there are pockets, yes, we do accept that the operation of electronic gaming machines in pubs, we do accept that there is an addictive nature, which is why we have a very strenuous program around our duty of care and harm minimisation. We are very concerned about the effects of the unregulated offshore online, it's quite a mouthful, gambling issues. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that's actually not local council's problems, but I think it is. It's all of our problems. If we are closing venues where the venue operators and venue managers are absolutely committed to a culture of care, and we're essentially forcing people into the underworld of gambling, I don't think that's very helpful. So having a policy which will effectively close these physically safe environments, I think needs to be questioned based on all the evidence that we have. Finally, the next slide, we do believe that there is an excellent problem gambling service available. There is a massive amount of funding which is allocated to this, over 76 million over 3 years. And I just want to say, I don't know who is in the room or who isn't in the room, or who you may or may not have heard from. Anecdotally, we obviously keep in touch with our colleagues throughout the sector, and we believe that there is an incredibly good service provider in your town, in your district, and we think the numbers, especially the data prevention services numbers available on, I think it's table 10 on the Ministry of website. You can be a glass half full or a glass half empty. Those numbers may seem to be high. I choose to believe that that's because those numbers aren't high. Those numbers are actually a good reflection of the commitment that the service provider has in your jurisdiction, and the level of comfort that people with potential problems with all forms of gambling have in approaching people for help. And ultimately, that's where we need to be. If anyone does have a problem, no matter what your comorbidity, what your addiction is, you need to feel comfortable to go to obtain some help. Finally, I just wanted to point out that our venue operator, as well as our venue manager and all venue staff in our venue in the Bluff, they all live, work, play, eat in the area. They are absolutely committed to the culture of care. They undertake regular training, that is essentially all I wanted to say to yourselves today. So my final slide just says thank you once again, and I will now attempt to answer questions.
Good. Thank you, Samantha. We'll attempt to ask some. Thank you for your submission on behalf of the Lion Foundation, and also noting that it's the Eagle and Bluff that really is your venue and our motto. Can I just double check that I heard your suggestion correctly, and that your premise in your submission was a sinking lid potentially reducing the number of gaming machines available has the potential of pushing people off into unregulated online gambling? Did I hear that correctly?
Well, yes, I think it does. I absolutely think it does, because ultimately we saw during the COVID, the COVID pandemic, that online providers, both TAB, Lotto, increased. The numbers increased, but most importantly, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of information available about unregulated offshore gambling, but we know that the numbers there, based on what we have, the numbers are huge. I think there was a BNZ, or one of the banks, made an article not so long ago, hundreds of millions of dollars disappearing off-site into unregulated gambling. If you close a physical spot, let's be honest, people will travel. Gambling has been around forever and will continue to be around forever. You've got casinos. People will travel to casinos, and I'm not going to go there, but I think the recent news articles will give us a bit of a headliner on that. Yes, I absolutely stand by the fact that even Malatest in their report, the lived-in experience surveys and questionnaires stated categorically that yes, their whānau word indeed going into unregulated offline, use your mobile and you can gamble.
Samantha, can I also ask, with the proceeds from the Eagle and Bluff, what processes are in place by your grants decision makers to ensure that the appropriate amount is returned into that community with the grants that you make?
Look, that is not a very, very straightforward question. I'll try and answer it as well as I can. We receive applications. And we implore the applicants to please give us as much information. We try and ask them to draw to inform us as best as they can as to the impact they will have within the direct community. What we do sometimes find, however, is we rely on the physical address of the organisation. With a lot of people now working from home, etc., that physical address sometimes doesn't translate to an Invercargill or a Bluff address. It may translate to a Queenstown address, for example. But yet we go through the paperwork, we'll have conversations, we check websites. Our regional grants committee will often ask us for further information. They themselves check websites. So we do what we can with the information that we have to ensure that the local rowing club, its building, if it needs a roof replaced, that it actually does benefit the members. We ask a question in our application form. designed to give us an indication of community benefit. We ask the applicant themselves to tell us, well, within your area of operation, what would you estimate, best guess, is the benefit to community? So yes, we do our damnedest, but sometimes, you know, if we fund an ambulance, for example, we would fund it, we would take a little bit from everywhere, because we like to think that the ambulance isn't going to stop at an imaginary line because it was funded from Queenstown or because it was funded from Dunedin, that it's got to stop at that magical line and go, sorry, no money from Invercargill, we're not going there. So yeah, it's a delicate balance, and we don't just simply push paperwork around. We do rely. We host, for example, a number of webinars where we're saying to people, you know, talk to us, discuss your grant application, because we don't like to decline things. If we can get money to an organisation, that's where we want to go. Long-winded, I know, sorry.
No, but a beauty. Thanks, Samantha. Trish, any questions?
No.
Ria?
Thank you very much, Samantha. No, whatever.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
There we go. You're off scot-free now, Samantha. Thank you very much for taking the time to come online and join us and speak to the submission.
Thank you very much, and my thanks to Kat on a really smooth process. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Well
Thank you.
presented, thank you.
Thank you.
So I know we were expecting Kay Christensen from Problem Gambling Association to zoom in. Is there any? Okay, well, we're beyond the time that we'd indicated for us, so I think we may continue. Before we go into our process, I have a question, and I don't care who answers it from staff, whether it's Darren, Rhiannon or Gillian, but it's around the process of when we adopt a policy, if there is a part of the policy that someone is seeking an exemption from, do they have a right to approach us to make a case for an exemption?
Yes.
Thank you. I know that's the process through liquor licensing, and I was just wondering if it was the same for gaming machines and TAB venues. So when we adopt the policy, if somebody believes that they're able to make a case that is an exception to our rules, they have a chance to make that. Thank you for that clarification. All right, let's get to the recommendations. I'm going to go down and move recommendations 1 to 4, which is that we receive the report, we receive the submissions, note the submitters who wished to be heard, and note the summary of submissions.
I'll second that.
Thanks, Trish. Put that all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So that's just procedural. I guess before we get into discussions, it's worth acknowledging a few points. Firstly, the Committee of Council is completely independent, and apart from the submissions that we have received from various organisations within our community and nationally, we are not beholden to any of them. We are beholden to our ratepayers who either return us or don't every 3 years. Having been through each process of review, in fact the initial adoption of the policy and the reviews since, the world has shifted markedly, and I think we need to acknowledge that, and that's thanks very much to the online world, particularly these things, and that it's created a very different environment that unquestionably adds to the harm which some of our submitters have acknowledged this morning, and I wholeheartedly acknowledge that. In fact, it's moved to the point where not only is it offshore gambling apps that are completely unregulated, but there are now also apps that look like gambling but are not, and are simply for entertainment. And you know, that's replica slot machines where you can add real money from your account to no chance of a win. You are just paying to play a game, and again, that's a distraction and a risk. And the same for TAB venues, because the number of venues that used to exist, you didn't have to go far on Melbourne Cup Tuesday or next week, New Zealand Trotting Cup, to go to a TAB and place a bet, apart from all the illegal sweepstakes that people ran. Whereas now you don't even have to, you know, leave your office. You can just you can do it all on that. Socially, it's still nice to go to a venue and enjoy some companionship, but there are all these other avenues for harm that exist, and the opportunity to gamble is far greater now than it's ever been. That said, we've only got a small, very small portion of which that we're able to deal with through an historic policy that may or may not be fit for purpose, but it is what it is, and we do our best through that process. The first several versions of the policy that Invercargill City Council adopted dealt with, we had a sinking lid policy, and it was only the last time that we went through the process that we introduced the cap, and that's now probably the biggest point that we've got to consider. Are we recommending to the Wellbeing Committee that we adopt either a sinking lid or cap for TAB venues and for the number of machines? I'm curious as to where the rest of the committee sit, just as an overview before we go through that. Anyone want to kick off?
Oh,
Thanks, Trish.
based on what I've read and the submissions I've heard have clarified that today, to me, I think it's got to be kept.
Can I ask why? Just
Well, the two things that I think is that it's the fact. Let me just get my thinking here together.
take your time.
Just you to ask me that question.
Yes. That's why I said take your time. I did lob a little bit of grenade.
Yeah.
Yes, I do want to see you think now.
I think that there's merit in having the place where the people, we can have the same venues. We do not want to encourage people to stay at home and go online. We can't stop that. But if we have the places where they are, that people are used to, they go for the social environment as much as, well, possibly, but for the gambling. And that's why I'm leaning towards it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And look, sorry, I didn't mean
It's all right.
to drop
I can
that on
handle
you. It's not often that council goes through the process of considering a policy and open, and I'm just really wanting to be transparent, recognizing the fact that, you know, people have put a lot of thought into their submissions, and there's some powerful points both ways. So Rhea, tag, you're it.
I'm thanks. Having heard from various members from the engagement hui that the council undertook, and having a good ear into that discussion in those groups there, then coming through and looking at what our absolute evidence provided to us through our submitters, and having the words used that a sinking lid is a blunt tool that we need to be aware of, that it could outlay a different behaviour into our community that is concerning. I'm of the mindset that I would support a cap over a sinking lid. My other mindfulness is also about the venues, the Class 4 venue policy. So I'm trying to weigh that up in my head at the same time. I think we've had a good argument from our submitters as to the different CBD and business zones and what they've asked for throughout their submissions. So I think that the information that we've been provided with, it's quite clear, it's very informative, and that's why I'm leading to where I am.
Okay, thanks, Bria. For transparency, where does Darren sit? Good question.
In the middle?
In the middle, between two roses, so I was told earlier. So having been through this process a few times and watching the results of a sinking lid and the potential effects that it's had as there have been movements and closures, we were, I think there's a sneaking suspicion, I think we were up around the 300 mark way back when we started.
And now we've got 226.
In my mind, I think a cap has worked in the past term, and that we haven't had, and in saying that, I think we need to acknowledge that it's been a strange period as well, because we've had a lockdown through it. I am mindful of the increased poverty and deprivation that our communities face, and particularly, as Te Whatu Ora pointed out, in our Māori and Pasifika communities. But much like the alcohol laws, I think the risks from alcohol consumption are highest from those who are drinking at home, because they're not supervised. And I think the same applies for gambling, in that I've watched and sat at machines where the reminders come up, and by sat at, it's a very occasional thing, but I do. I have seen staff within those venues approach people who've obviously been sitting there. But I'm also aware of the items in the news around an Auckland casino that may not have been executing its responsibilities properly, and that'll be dealt with in the same way that it was, I suspect, with the Dunedin casino when it failed to meet its obligations. I don't hear feedback from within our community that is a problem, and people at the moment are quick to point out when they're not happy with things. So from that perspective, I am comfortable with where you're both at in looking at caps as opposed to sinking lids, with the comfort that this policy comes up for review regularly. Brianna.
Just an administrative matter before you vote on Resolution 5. Just to say, writing another report, could we amend Resolution 5 to recommend that the Community Wellbeing Committee recommend to Council to adopt?
Yes.
Yep.
Because the final decision will rest with Council. And noting that, because I know that there was some discussion around the document that we were going to take out for consultation around caps and sinking lids, that whichever recommendation we go with, Council either approves a recommendation or rejects it. They do not get to negotiate on it, because Council did not go through this hearings process. If they reject it, we start again, and we go back out for consultation. And we can go round and round and round that mulberry bush until people understand how the process works. That's fine. Yeah. If that is Council's pleasure, then so be it. So let's move to recommendation 5. The recommendation is that a cap board venue policy and class 4 venues policy is what you're wanting to put forward.
Mm-hmm.
Who's moving that?
I will.
Trish?
Second.
Thank you. Put that all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Are there any points of contention within recommendation 6 that the committee wishes to flesh out? Because the relocation formed part of that, or are you comfortable with having heard and read the submissions with those recommendations?
I'm comfortable with it.
Maria?
In my head, when I was listening to the submitters talking about the relocation provisions, and for those reasons being the harm prevention and minimalisation, a more extensive, nicer venue, and what have you, I felt more comfortable with that, because prior to that, I wasn't sure exactly how that could be of a non-benefit. So I had to get my head around what that submission, part of that submission, was alluding to. And then with the fact, I do beg the pardon and say this, if a venue wants to relocate and
If someone seeks an exemption,
sorry, yes, they can.
Which
So
is
I
what-
feel
what
quite
the question was asked.
yeah. So I feel satisfied with that buffer there. That gives me more confidence.
Good. That's why I asked it. It's a matter of process that I knew existed there. I wasn't 100% sure. because
Yeah,
we've
that
never
was really
had-
good.
Never had an application for an exemption under this process, but it does exist. So with that in mind, who wishes to move the adoption of item 6 as it stands, or is somebody wanting to move it with any variations?
I'm happy to move it as it stands.
And I'll second it.
Okay. Are there any further matters you wish to discuss around that? If not, I will put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Councillors, that brings this process to its conclusion. As we just pointed out, we now make a recommendation to the Community Wellbeing Committee, which then recommends onto Council. Again, the Community Wellbeing Committee can either approve the recommendation or reject it. So there's 2 further bites that happen, but ultimately, if it doesn't go through, we go back and start again, and that's fine. To the people who've submitted, whether they were ended up online or not, or here in person, thank you for that. And for those who had only offered written submissions, those have been considered and hold equal weight, whether people wished to speak to them or not. So thank you very much for that. With that in mind, I'll close this hearing. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.